How's it going, super friends? Welcome back to my channel. I'm Brad, the DC Universe Geek, and greetings from the Great White North. And from my mom's basement. I just got finished watching the DC Universe animated feature, Superman Red Son. I'm just going to assume from this point forward going on that pretty much everyone who's watching this video is familiar with the Superman Red Son Elseworlds graphic novel. A fantastic classic amongst classics, if I do say so myself, so I really shouldn't have to explain that the story takes place in Soviet Russia because that's where his rocket crash landed instead of on the Kent farm in Kansas, United States. And so we have a last son of Krypton who grows up under the Kremlin and alongside Stalin, and I shouldn't have to explain that, right? Just off the bat, I will say the very idea of a Superman who is under the hammer and sickle of Soviet Russia is definitely an interesting concept to explore. And that's probably why this got so popular, because it shows how the goodness of Superman, no matter where he lands, will always prevail. Now, I will say this about the movie, and I'm going to try and give as little spoilers as possible, and you know how bad I am at not giving spoilers, but I'm really going to try for this video. I will say this. The animation for this one is absolutely markedly better than it has been in some of the previous DC Animated Film Universe outings. There were times when I was watching Batman Hush going, that looks pretty good. Ooh, that's rough. This one actually seemed to have some of the least amount of really bad, cheesy, stupid-looking animation. I really thought that they pulled their socks up. As for the animation style of this movie, when you watch it, if you've watched it, you'll find that it's all too familiar because it really does have a very Bruce Timm Batverse style to it. Not exactly, but it definitely has a Bruce Timm feel to it, and I feel like that's a perfect match for a story that starts off during the Second World War. It really, that classic Bruce Timm animation really matches that era of animated storytelling, and it translates well for the rest of the movie too. I can also say that the way they wrote this movie and paced this movie from scene to scene, act to act to act, is actually quick enough that it keeps you interested, it keeps you watching. There were no lull points where I was like, I'm kind of bored with this. It was really well done storytelling. And of course they omitted parts from the original graphic novel, because how can you tell the entire story without omitting small pieces here and there? But in general, I feel like they kept a lot of the story intact, even though they did make small changes. Basically, without ruining all the plot points of the story, a young Superman, about 12 years old, realizes that he's got all these new powers that are beginning to brim up and bubble up within inside of him. And those powers he is then convinced to donate to the state, and why wouldn't he? He's a good little communist boy, and he just wants to further the will of the people, to help the people in Soviet Russia. And so he grows up alongside Stalin, and he's the nation's Superman, and all things are wonderful until one day he decides he's not content anymore to be a good little communist boy and fight the Soviet fight, when he makes some really bad, startling, horrific discoveries about, grottos and mass murders and stuff like that, and you know, certain people, certain of the Russian people, the lower of their people, just being left to starve and die, and they're being worked as slaves, and so that obviously doesn't sit well with Soups, and they have to show that Soups is still Soups on the inside, that even though he landed in Soviet Russia, I mean, that's not his fault where his rocket ship landed, so it's Superman under the circumstances of a Russian dictatorship growing up under that guidance. So you can really see that he believes in those principles. Anyhow, no longer content to just be Stalin's little errand boy, he decides to question Stalin on what he's doing and why he's doing it, and Stalin doesn't really give him a suffice answer, and then when he does, it's the wrong answer, the absolute worst answer he could have given Superman. And so what does Superman do? Takes him off the chessboard, and then doesn't waste any time in becoming Russia's supreme and only premier dictator leader. Comrade Superman's heart is in the right place. He really does want to help people stop suffering, stop war, have as few casualties as possible. I mean, he even goes as far as to put fluoxetine in the water, which is an antidepressant, to stop people from committing suicide. There is a tone of this movie for the first half that is very, very anti-American feeling, but understand this is from the perspective of a Soviet Superman, so we have to empathize with him, we have to see what he's thinking, we have to watch him go from one place to another. He has to go from, I want the best for people and I'm going to use a dictatorship to do it, to, I want the best for people and I realize that people need to make their own decisions and have their own free will. I guess without completely wrecking the entire story, and I say this a lot after wrecking a lot of the story, it's definitely worth the watch, and it has all of the major players from the graphic novel. Lex Luthor, Lois Lane, Batman, Hal Jordan, Brainiac. It has the US Bizarro-y version of Superman, that clone that goes terribly, terribly wrong. They're all there. Most of the story remains intact, and it's definitely worth watching. Now, I know that some of you might actually be turned off by the idea of a Soviet-Russian Superman, but I want you to keep in mind that this is not really a story about a Russian Superman. Not really. That's the vehicle for which we are telling the story. But really it's a story about how Superman is Superman no matter where his rocket crash lands and no matter what country he is in. He grew up under the tutelage of Soviet Russian ideals, under the shadow of the Kremlin, and he still turned out like Superman. And I think that is the main takeaway for this story. You can take the America out of Superman, but you can't take the Superman out of... No, that doesn't make sense. You can take the Superman out of America, but you can't take the Superman out of his heart. Anyway, Super Friends, that's my simple, basic, uncandid review of Superman Red Son, the animated feature from DC Entertainment. I really liked it. I highly recommend it to you if you're a Superman fan or if you've been watching any of these DC animated features. It's definitely worth the time. It's definitely worth the money if you do decide to invest in the Blu-ray when it eventually does come out into the public market. You can add that steel box to your collection up on the shelves, and it's going to look fantastic, and it's going to look even more fantastic when you play it on your screen. That was basically just a commercial for it. DC needs to pay me. But yeah, that's my story. I'm sticking to it. Hopefully you found this video to be a useful, interesting, entertaining, insightful waste of time for the day. If you have, you know how the like button works. Feel free to leave a comment if you'd like to. And if it's your first time here, then I invite you today, on the behalf of the rest of the Super Friends. There's none actually here, but they're in the comment section. And I invite you on behalf of the rest of the Super Friends to join the DC squad simply by, you guessed it, hitting the subscribe button. Or don't. I feel kind of cringy asking people to subscribe, actually. Never really said that. It's just part of the spiel. That's what you do. You ask them to subscribe. Okay. Bye.